In the early years of America's tough-on-crime era, few political figures made more headlines on capital punishment than Bill Clinton. As governor of Arkansas, Clinton presided over multiple executions, a role that would later follow him into the national spotlight during his presidential campaign. His decision to leave the 1992 campaign trail to oversee the execution of a mentally impaired inmate sparked national controversy and cemented his stance on law and order. Under his watch, several prisoners were put to death, and each case marked by its own grim story, legal battles, and final moments. From last meals to haunting final words, these executions offer a chilling look into how justice was carried out under Clinton's leadership. This video reveals the full list of those executed, the details of their crimes, and the final rituals before death that the world rarely sees. John Edward Swindler, State, Arkansas, execution date June 18, 1990. John Edward Swindler was executed on June 18, 1990, marking the first use of the death penalty in Arkansas since its reinstatement in 1976. His execution came under the administration of then-Governor Bill Clinton and was carried out at the Cummins Unit in Lincoln County. Swindler had been convicted for the brutal murder of Fort Smith police officer Randy Basnett, whom he shot and killed in 1976 during a traffic stop. Basnett, a young officer, had approached Swindler without realizing the danger he posed, as Swindler was already wanted for the murder of a teenager in Georgia. The killing of a law enforcement officer added to the severity of Swindler's case and led to a swift capital prosecution. The trial and conviction of Swindler gained considerable public and media attention. His defense attorneys raised concerns about fairness and the adequacy of mental health evaluations, but these arguments failed to overturn his death sentence. Swindler had been on death row for over a decade before his execution. He made no final statement and displayed little emotion during the execution process. What made the case even more historically significant was the method used: electrocution. Swindler was executed in Arkansas's electric chair, nicknamed Old Sparky, making him the only post-Furman inmate to be electrocuted in the state. Governor Bill Clinton's role in the case became politically symbolic. By signing off on the execution order, Clinton emphasized his commitment to law and order, an image he would later carry into his presidential campaign. The decision to move forward with Swindler's execution was seen by some as a strategic political calculation, given the national debate on crime and the death penalty. Swindler's execution sparked debate not just for the crime itself, but also for its broader implications. Civil liberties groups criticized the use of the electric chair as outdated and inhumane, especially as most states were transitioning to lethal injection. Nonetheless, the state proceeded, and the execution was witnessed by several members of the press and prison officials. Ronald Gene Simmons, State, Arkansas, execution date June 25, 1990. Ronald Gene Simmons was executed on June 25, 1990 in Arkansas, making him the second individual executed under Governor Bill Clinton's administration. Simmons was responsible for one of the deadliest mass killings in U.S. history, having murdered 16 people, including 14 members of his own family, over the course of several days in December 1987. The horrifying spree began at his home in Dover, Arkansas, where he systematically killed his wife, children, and grandchildren, later murdering 2 co-workers and a stranger in a separate rampage. The calculated and gruesome nature of his crimes shocked the nation and left a lasting scar on the state. Simmons, a former military man, had a deeply troubled past marked by controlling behavior, allegations of abuse, and a growing sense of isolation. Leading up to the murders, he had reportedly become increasingly paranoid and resentful, particularly after being accused of molesting his daughter, with whom he had allegedly fathered a child. He meticulously planned the killings, even building a makeshift pit in his yard where he disposed of some of the bodies. When law enforcement arrived at his residence, they discovered bodies hidden under layers of debris and in water-filled trenches. The brutality and sheer number of victims made Simmons' case one of the most disturbing in modern American criminal history. What made Simmons' case even more unusual was his attitude toward his punishment. He refused to appeal his death sentence, making it clear he wanted to be executed. During his trial, he showed little remorse and was adamant about accepting responsibility. His final words were, "Justice delayed finally be done is justifiable homicide," reflected his belief that his own execution was not only deserved, but overdue. This stoic acceptance of his fate distinguished him from many death row inmates who often fight for clemency or retrial. Simmons was executed by lethal injection at the Cummins Unit in Lincoln County and was pronounced dead at 9:19 p.m. His decision to waive all appeals allowed the process to move faster than typical death penalty cases, leading to his execution less than 3 years after his crimes. Simmons' case remains one of the most notorious in Arkansas history. Ricky Ray Rector, State, Arkansas. Execution date, January 24, 1992. Ricky Ray Rector was executed in the state of Arkansas on January 24, 1992, during the presidential campaign of then-Governor Bill Clinton. Rector had been convicted of 2 murders, one in 1981, when he killed a man during an altercation at a restaurant, and the second, more notably, the killing of Conway police officer Robert Martin. After the officer convinced him to surrender, Rector feigned cooperation, then shot Martin in the back. Shortly after the second murder, Rector attempted suicide by shooting himself in the head, which resulted in a lobotomy-like injury that severely impaired his mental faculties. Due to the self-inflicted gunshot wound, Rector was left with severe cognitive impairments, including memory loss, and an apparent lack of understanding regarding his impending execution. His attorneys and mental health advocates argued that executing someone who didn't comprehend the nature or consequences of their punishment violated the Eighth Amendment's prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment. The most striking and tragic symbol of his condition came on the night of his execution. He famously set aside the pecan pie from his last meal, saying he would save it for later, not realizing he would not live to eat it. Despite these concerns, Governor Clinton rejected clemency appeals and personally returned to Arkansas during his 1992 presidential campaign to oversee the execution. This decision was widely interpreted as a political move to bolster his image as a tough on-crime Democrat. The execution became a national flashpoint in debates over the morality and legality of capital punishment for mentally impaired individuals. Rector's last words were, "I have no comment." He was executed by lethal injection at the Cummins Unit in Lincoln County, Arkansas. His case remains one of the most controversial executions in modern American history, highlighting the clash between justice, mental health, and politics during the height of the tough on-crime era. Stephen Douglas Hill, State, Arkansas. Execution date, May 7, 1992. Stephen Douglas Hill was executed on May 7, 1992, in the state of Arkansas for the 1984 murder of State Trooper Linda Ann Bryant. The crime occurred during a brazen prison escape attempt that ended in tragedy. Hill, who was already incarcerated at the time, managed to overpower a guard and seize a weapon. While attempting to flee custody, he encountered Trooper Bryant, who was responding to the escape. During the confrontation, Hill fatally shot her. The murder of a law enforcement officer while on duty shocked the community and reinforced calls for strict punishment. Hill's trial took place shortly after the murder, and he was convicted of capital murder. The jury sentenced him to death, a decision that was upheld through multiple rounds of appeals. Over the years, Hill's legal team filed petitions citing various procedural concerns, but none were successful in overturning the conviction or the sentence. Hill eventually exhausted all appeals, and Governor Bill Clinton, who was in office at the time, signed the execution order. As with other executions during Clinton's tenure, the case drew attention for the governor's active involvement in allowing capital punishment to proceed. Following his execution, there are no publicly accessible official records confirming the exact last words and image of Stephen Douglas Hill. While some secondary sources suggest that Hill expressed gratitude to his family and hoped for closure for the victim's family, these statements are not corroborated by primary sources such as official transcripts or contemporaneous news reports. He was executed by lethal injection at the Cummins Unit in Lincoln County, Arkansas, the standard site for executions in the state at the time. The execution of Stephen Douglas Hill marked the continued application of the death penalty in Arkansas during Clinton's administration. While Hill's crime involved the murder of a state trooper, one of the gravest offenses under the law, the case still sparked conversations about the use of the death penalty, especially in the context of broader criminal justice reform debates that would intensify in the following decade. William Frank Parker, State, Arkansas, date of execution, August 8, 1996. William Frank Parker was convicted for the 1984 murders of his former in-laws, James and Sandra Warren, in Rogers, Arkansas. He was also involved in the attempted murder of his estranged wife and a police officer during a subsequent standoff. Governor Clinton signed Parker's execution order on November 8, 1990, setting the execution date for December 5, 1990. However, due to legal challenges and procedural delays, the execution was postponed. Ultimately, Parker was executed on August 8, 1996. While on death row, Parker underwent a significant personal transformation, converting to Buddhism in 1988 after reading Buddhist texts during solitary confinement. He adopted the name Sifu, meaning teacher in Chinese, and became a devout practitioner, engaging in meditation, crafting origami, and studying Buddhist teachings. His spiritual journey garnered attention from notable figures including the Dalai Lama, who appealed for clemency on his behalf. Despite widespread appeals, the execution proceeded as scheduled. On the day of his execution, Parker was moved to a quiet room near the death chamber at the Cummins Unit in southeast Arkansas. He was permitted visits from his spiritual advisor and attorney. As he entered the execution chamber, Parker chanted in a language unfamiliar to witnesses. His final words were, "I seek refuge in the Buddha. I seek refuge in the Dharma. I seek refuge in the Sangha," reflecting his deep Buddhist faith. He was pronounced dead at 9:04 p.m. CDT, 3 minutes after receiving the lethal injection. Regarding Parker's last meal, specific details about his final meal are not publicly documented. However, it is known that he shared this meal with his spiritual advisor, Kobutsu Shindo, in a room adjacent to the execution chamber. They spent time together, with Parker dividing his personal belongings and writing letters to friends and family. This final act highlighted his commitment to his spiritual path and the peace he sought in his final moments. Mark Edward Gardner, State, Arkansas, date of execution, September 8, 1999. This execution carried out under Governor Bill Clinton's administration in Arkansas, as Gardner was convicted for the brutal 1985 murders of Joe and Martha Joyce and their adult daughter, Sarah Joyce McCurdy, in Sebastian County, Arkansas. The crime involved the suffocation of the parents, assault, and murder of their daughter. Gardner was on parole for an armed robbery conviction at the time and was also under an arrest warrant from Illinois for another armed robbery. He was arrested after being found with some of the family's stolen jewelry and confessed to the murders, claiming that demons had compelled him to commit the crimes. Gardner's execution was scheduled and carried out on September 8, 1999, at the Cummins Unit in Lincoln County, Arkansas. He was executed by lethal injection and pronounced dead at 9:02 p.m. Gardner's execution was notable for being one of the few in Arkansas where the inmate did not make a final statement or request a special last meal. He declined to offer any final words and chose not to have a last meal, instead opting for the standard prison fare. During his time on death row, Gardner was accused of repeatedly assaulting and beating a fellow inmate, Damian Eccles, who was later released from prison after being convicted for the West Memphis 3 murders. This allegation brought additional attention to Gardner's case and the conditions within the prison system. Gardner's execution marked the continuation of Arkansas's use of the death penalty during the 1990s, a period that saw a significant number of executions in the state. His case, involving multiple murders and allegations of prison violence, underscored the complexities and controversies surrounding capital punishment. Barry Lee Fairchild, State, Arkansas. Execution of date, August 31, 1995. Barry Lee Fairchild execution carried out in Arkansas following the reinstatement of the death penalty. Fairchild was convicted for the 1983 kidnapping and murder of Marjorie Greta Mason, a 22-year-old Air Force nurse. His case garnered significant attention due to concerns about the validity of his confession and allegations of police coercion. Despite these concerns and appeals from various advocacy groups, Fairchild was executed by lethal injection on August 31, 1995, at the Cummins Unit in Lincoln County, Arkansas. Fairchild's execution was notable for the controversies surrounding his conviction. He had an IQ of 60, indicating intellectual disability, and his confession was obtained under questionable circumstances. Supporters argued that his mental capacity and the manner in which his confession was obtained should have precluded the death penalty. Nevertheless, the courts upheld his conviction and sentence, leading to his execution. Regarding his final words, Fairchild maintained his innocence until the end. Barry Lee Fairchild did not make a final statement before his execution. As noted by the witnesses, Barry Lee Fairchild, 41, had no final statement before being put to death by injection Thursday evening. Details about Fairchild's last meal are not publicly documented. It's possible that records of his final meal were not preserved or made available to the public. From the victims to those accused, the executions during Bill Clinton's time as governor reflect just how complicated the death penalty truly is. Each case carried its own weight, filled with tragedy, tough questions, and lingering doubts. For some, these moments represent justice. For others, they raise haunting concerns about fairness and morality. Either way, they've left a lasting mark on America's story. If you want more eye-opening stories like this, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.